Welcome to the Heresy Lodge. I am your host, Dylan Cooper, with our constant host over here.
Gavin Franklin.
And for the first time ever, we have our first host, and it's pretty awesome. He is hailing from Scotland. He made us love Horus and hate Horus in the same book. He made Fulcrum into a Slaneshi monster, which was definitely different. Didn't see that coming at all. First person to actually make me put down a book so I can figure out what the hell just happened. Made us fall for Magnus and kind of dislike Magnus at the same time. And, well, he's a New York Times bestseller. He may or may not be the real Graham McNeill. I don't know. Twitter won't verify him. But, guys, it is Graham McNeill.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, guys. Because that's a great introduction. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. One thing we always do for every episode is we always have a drink. And since you're from Scotland, we got ourselves a scotch. We got ourselves some Johnny Walker.
Nice.
That's
yeah.
the Game of Thrones Johnny Walker version. So it's pretty.
Was that the White Walker version?
Yeah. Not cold though, so not as good as expected.
No, surely the ice would form within it as you drink.
Yeah, I got these little cube things that are supposed to keep cold that don't dissolve, so it doesn't dilute it or anything.
Yeah, I don't have a whiskey on me. I have a strong coffee if that's any help.
Oh hell yeah!
But yeah, I mean that's I must admit that's why they threw me out of Scotland. I don't drink whiskey at all. Can't stand the stuff.
Oh man, they really just kicked you out and shipped you straight to LA.
throw me some Jack Daniels and I will drain the bottle, but actual Scotch, not so much.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I feel like Scotch is like a lot smoother. That's very weird.
I don't know. I think it's, JD and Coke was always my sort of rock and roll drink back in the day, but whiskey I think I tried it too young. Snuck a bit out my dad's decanter one time when I was barely in my teens and was like, oh God, never touching that again. So scarred as a youth from an early drink and decided never to try it again.
See, my problem is I hate it, but everyone else likes it, so I'm going to like this damn thing. Just kept drinking it.
The old peer pressure gambit.
Yeah, I mean it's how I learned how to like coffee too, because my wife loved it. Well, I got to figure this out, or it's going to be a long marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a Costco's Prime.
There you go.
There you go. Quality brew here.
So I kind of want to start this off. So we have a Primarch ranking that we have been going as we've been going through the books. So Gavin over here, he actually has a decent amount of 40k knowledge. He plays the tabletop. I'm kind of getting into it. But the Heresy was my first introduction. So our Primarch rankings are pretty different. So we want to throw you on the list and see how you would rank them. So none of mine reflect any type of chaos fuckery. So take it how you will. You can handle it however you want. But I'm going to share my screen here so you can kind of take a gander. And I would love to get your opinions on these.
Okay.
And what you would like to do.
Okay. Primarch ranking.
Combat.
What are we talking, fun to write? Levels of how awesome they are, or who do you think would win on the tabletop if they got into a slugging match?
So for me, it's always been who would win in the books if they got into a slugging match, because I know the tabletop doesn't always reflect.
The narrative strength rather as opposed to the tabletop strength.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, purely by dint of how I have described them in the books, I think Magnus has to be top of the list. I mean, his psychic might is second to none. It is at least, in the realms of space of the emperors. So I think he has to be in a one-on-one flat playing field, in the middle of Ullanor kind of thing. I think Magnus would basically wipe the floor with anyone.
All right, I
sort
love it. Yeah, Magnus.
Going full on Mysterio, changing your perceptions of what you were seeing and bringing the planet down around you, wrecking your mind from the inside out. Yeah, I'd give it to Magnus.
So I feel like we saw Magnus go one-on-one with Lehman Us and kind of get his ass kicked.
He did, but he was holding back at that point still. He was still kind of thinking. I think he knew if he'd gone full on and ripped Russ apart, that was it. There was no coming back from that moment where he still probably at that point thought, this is all a huge misunderstanding, and as long as I don't kill him, I can explain this. I could show them with the clarity of my thinking and pure logic and reasoning. I can sort this all out. I'm clever enough to sort out even this mess. So I think he was holding something back even at that point.
Okay, cool. I like that. I like Magnus's number one. I like the description of it. So who would be number two?
Number two. Let me see. Look at that list. Again, we're looking at also. I mean, there's so many variables in this. Like Angron would just be like this relentless force pummeling you into the ground that just would not stop, no matter how much hurt and damage you did to him. Perturabo would have already figured out every single weak point on your body and your defense and know how to prise it open. Fulcrum would outskill you. Alfarius, you might even not know you were fighting him at the time until you were already cut to bits.
You might actually be Alfarius, you don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the point. That fight actually probably ended 20 minutes ago and you're already dead and you haven't even noticed it. Again, Vulcan with his perpetual nature would just keep coming back no matter how much you burned him, stabbed him, shot him. He's just going to keep coming up again. It's a hard ranking. I mean, I would put, and Horus again, he knows everything about you. He knows how you fight, what your weakness is, all the strengths that the other Primarchs would have. He has, at turn to 11, even more than they do. I don't know. It's,
well, I haven't heard you mention Sanguinius.
Sanguinius, yeah, I mean, yeah, we've seen him take out Titans single-handedly, and he is like the consummate, beautiful warrior. But, Horus beats him on the Vengeful Spirit, towards the end, as we know, spoiler alert.
Your entire life just got destroyed there.
I'm going to say, let's just for the sake of getting through this list without, spending like the next 5 hours on it, because we could.
Sure.
I'm going to go for Vulcan, because, like I say, you just can't beat him. He'll always keep coming back. And he will wear you down, and no matter how many blows you land on him, he will get back up again. Let's see, after that, I mean, let's see. Probably at this point, I would say Perturabo. Because again, he is like he's looking at your body in this fight as a fortress that he's going to break into, and he can absolutely do it. Then let's see, what else have we got? Let's go Angron and Fulcrum after that.
Angron and Fulcrum.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I say that's. There's always that sort of push and pull between that the perfection of the fighter and the swordsman, and the fury of like the berserker kind of thing. So you've got, you saw that in the conflict between Loken and Lucius when they were in the fighting cages. Lucius was by far the better swordsman and the better fighter, but Loken knew exactly how to beat him. He got him angry and then punched his damn head off nearly. So but I still think Fulcrum now has probably got better as a traitor, as a demon. He knows he could do it. Because again, he's got, as we saw in Saturnine, he has some pretty cool regenerative powers as well. Let's see who we've got next. Okay, let's go for Horus and Guilliman, and Leman Russ.
Horus, Guilliman, then Leman Russ. Do you think Guilliman can take out Leman?
I think he could. I think Leman Russ is one of the ones who everybody underestimates. They think he's, the savage barbarian who could be probably goaded into something. And depending on the circumstances, he'd be. I mean, a lot of these are circumstantial. Who would be higher? Guilliman, I think, the Avenging Sun is one of the most powerful ones, but he's probably bound by the rules. He fights Queensberry rules style when everybody else is like, no, this is a fight to the death brawl. I'm trying to think who we've got next. Let's see. I think Dorn would be up there. Yeah, Dorn, then maybe Mortarian, and
Granted, we don't have any of his chaos bullshit yet in the books, as we are just now finishing Prospero Burns.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's still basically Mortarian as we knew him. Who have we missed out? So yeah, we'll stick Sanguinius in there.
So low.
I
know. What about the Lion?
Well, the thing is, this is a sort of I look at this as a first draft of the list, and then I would hone it and go, actually, yeah, no, now you think about it, that one would be higher, that one would be lower. So this is just like the barf draft of a list. Then say Lion, the Lion,
and the
yeah, the sneaky ones I always tend to put lower down in this ranking, because we're looking at, okay, you're standing in front of me, you're stripped of all the advantages that would normally have you behind me and underneath me and above me before I even knew you were there. But if we're looking at a one-on-one, that advantage is gone. So let's put Khan, Corax, and Conrad. Because I think Conrad relies on the terror tactics, the strike from the darkness, the whispers around you, the blow you don't see coming, and take that away from him. And I think you could relatively, obviously, take him out pretty easily. And then who have we got left? Alfarius and Lorgar down towards the bottom.
Yeah,
definitely Lorgar at the lowest.
Because have we missed anyone? Oh yeah, and Ferrus Manus, given that he'd get his head cut off very early, so he's probably.
You want him last?
Yeah, Lorgar than Manus. I mean, again, this is a first draft. I would refine and hone it as I remember moments and powers and so on. But that's got a good sort of first draft version of what I would see.
I like it because it's so different from ours. Because like I said, everything I know right now is just from the first 16 books of the Heresy so far.
Mm-hmm.
And his experience is obviously very different from mine too. Then we have yours, who's written several books and have dealt with several of these characters, and it's way different.
Yeah. Like I say, there's elements in there. If you got, remember, he's got such and such, or he can do this. We'll take that into advisement. But I think that's a good first list. Yeah, I would certainly the first three I would take. I don't see them changing much.
I like it.
The only thing I would disagree greatly on is the fact that Lorgar is not last.
Yeah, pretty much every time Lorgar or the Word Bearers are mentioned on our podcast, we just bash on them the entire time because we hate them.
Well, that's fair enough. They are to be despised, but there's something fun in that.
There's something else. The whole cult thing, just can't get behind it.
I really enjoy. My favorite from the first Heretic was when Lorgar was like, "I'm gonna go fight Corvus Corax," and you have Erebus like, "No, you're gonna die," and I was like, "Yeah, I probably will."
Yeah. So he knows that's his. He is ultimately he's a Primarch. He's still a god amongst Marines and so on, but he knows that's not his role. His role in the Heresy is not to be the guy at the forefront of the armies smashing enemies before him. His job is to spread the creed. His job is to expose the lie of the Imperium, the Emperor's falsity. His job is to be the proselytizer, the converter, and so on. He's not there to be the fighter.
Yeah, he's an interesting character because you have these other Primarchs, and even though they all have their niches, they're warriors. Magnus was talking to him about this. In order to be a leader, a Primarch, you have to be a warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Or did not go with that. So I really find him the most outstandish, strange of Primarchs compared to everyone else. Even though they have their unique things about them, at the end of the day, they are warriors, and he is not. I like that a lot.
Yeah. That's every Space Marine, regardless of whether they are an apothecary, a chaplain, a librarian, whatever they are. These are secondary. They're first and foremost warriors. Genetically engineered killing machines. Everything else is subsequent to that.
So I want to talk about a little bit kind of that concept and how when you write novels, right, and you have every character being this god of war, space marine, it can be very tiresome to read and even to write. So our favorite characters are often the remembrances or the evils that are depicted in the story. Would you say like that was exciting to you to be able to write the human perspective of
Yeah, I think in every story, in every novel, anthology, whatever, you need variety of texture to keep things interesting. You don't, if you play the same note constantly, it's boring eventually. So that's what makes things interesting. That variance in the tune, the variance in the characters, the variance in the altitude of, are you looking from 10,000 feet? Are you right down in the weeds of the story? So having the remembrances just gave us lots of options for other kinds of characters. It allowed us to have a breadth of some diversity in what were kind of characters we had, whether male or female or whatever other aspect we wanted to embody within them. So yeah, I mean, all the Space Marines were, relative to the remembrances, they were like godlike super beings. But even there, you had texture within them, because what's interesting about a character more often than not are their flaws, the things that make them not as special as they should be. So even in the Space Marine ranks, you had, the guys who were the better swordsmen, the guys who were the brawlers, the ones who was confident, the one who was cocky, the one who had doubts. That kept those characters who they, from the outside looking in as a remembrancer, you might think of them all the same. They're all, so far above you, you can't see the gradations within them. But yeah, absolutely. Having the remembrance characters was fun because you got to have a more human perspective and you got to vary the viewpoint. You weren't always looking at it from the point of view of how do we conquer this? How do we fight it? It was like, okay, how do we remember this? How do we see our place within this? How do we record this in a way for future generations that will be remembered? Hence the name, obviously. So it was just, finding ways to tell the story through different lenses, and that's always interesting because it allows you to do many things within the context of a story.
For those characters that like you just like are able to just like make up, or does like Black Library have like you need to have like X amount of things like in these books?
No, we were given a remarkably free hand with the books. I mean, we would all gather at Black Library back in Nottingham, usually about 4 times a year when we were doing these novels. And we would have a start off with a kind of a state of the nation. Where are we? What stories have we told? What beats have we hit? What have we yet to do? What characters have we seen? What kinds of war? What kind of events have we seen? So that we knew that we wouldn't do the next bunch of novels just repeating the same beats. So we were very good at generally policing ourselves to make sure that we would always have some variety in tone and character types and so on. And when it came to planning out what would actually go in the story, beyond like, okay, you're going to tell the story of the Battle of Calth, or you're going to tell the fall of Prospero. Beyond that, it was like, go nuts, tell the story you want to tell, as long as we have, in collaboration with the other editors and writers, that we knew, okay, in this book we have to hit this point. So and so has to die, so and so has to learn this. This battle has to happen. We've got to end the story at roughly this point. How you get there and who you use to tell it to go around that direction, it was pretty much always up to the author.
Gotcha. So like, how different is it writing like when you wrote False Gods, like you had Dan before you, then you had James Swallow after. Like how was
Ben,
it? Like,
Ben Counter?
Oh yeah, Ben Counter, yes. And then like you guys had a completely, like each book was very different. So like how much like went into like you three talking back and forth, and then like doing something like random, like say if you had like a normal trilogy, like how different do you think it would have been?
Well, I mean, with any project of this scale, communication is paramount, and we put a lot of legwork in beforehand before we started any of these books to figure out, okay, what's the overall arc of the 3 books, then what's the individual arc of each particular novel, what characters are we going to pull from 1 to 2 to 3, and then when during the writing, because I didn't start writing False Gods until I think Dan had finished the first one, so I read that book like 4 or 5 times, just pretty much back to back, just to acquaint myself with it. Because the first time I read it in its manuscript form, I don't think I almost took anything in. I was reading it going, oh my god, this is so good, this is so good. Oh my god, this is brilliant. Then it's like, okay, now I need to actually read it with a more surgical gaze to pick out, right, okay, here's a character arc that is continuing. Here's a story that the beats will pick up from this part and so on. Because Dan did a great job putting together a document after he'd finished it of saying, okay, here's what I intended with the book. Here's how I see some of these threads going on. Here's what I intended this ball to roll further down to, and so on. So that was a great guide as to here's some things I set up in the book. Do with them as you will. With caveat of knowing the kind of places we were going to get to. And we were in contact pretty much at least every day with emails, almost every other day with phone calls or Skype chats and so on. And it was always like things like, oh, yeah, because he was still in the process of doing the rewrites and edits on it while I was writing False Gods. So there would be, I would send him an email saying, oh, I'm putting this moment, this scene, or this character in the book. Would you be able to give them a nod sometime through your book so that it's like foreshadowed, and when it comes up in my book, people will be like, oh man, there's that character, or the payoff for that moment that was set up in the first book. Or Dan would say, hey, I'm putting this thing in here, and it'd be great if you could, do something with that in your book. So it was a real back and forward relationship with Dan and I to figure out how to really dovetail these books together in a way that felt it as seamless as we could make it in terms of the story, the characters, the development of the plot, while still kind of maintaining each other's, authorial voice within the story, so that Dan's book read like a Dan's book, my book read like one of my books, and so on. So they felt authentic to each author, but still carried the story forward, where the characters felt like the same characters, talked like they used to do in the book 1, book 2, and what have you. So that was it was a tremendous fun working with Dan, because he is one of the most generous collaborators that I've ever worked with.
Gotcha. So how do you really hold the same character identity through as different authors? Because I mean between especially the original trilogy, there's definitely you could kind of tell very slightly how a character would feel slightly different from each one. How do you guys try to really keep that so smooth?
Especially with the Primarch showing up, right? Because Magnus, for instance, is in a lot of books, but he really shines in Thousand Suns. A lot of times we find ourselves thinking, would Magnus really act like he did in this book compared to how he was in Thousand Suns?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing to remember, I always thought is in each book their core is the same character, but they're not the same character. And you see, I mean, because things have happened along the way that have changed them. I mean, that's the essence of the characters, is that they are changing all the way through this. I mean, we try and keep it so that they're not reading or speaking wildly different. I mean, they're going to change because they've developed and learned and grown and had experiences in earlier books that will shape them and change them in some ways. But really, in terms of making them feel like, yeah, okay, this guy's changed because of experience he's had, but it's still fundamentally the same character. It was largely a case of just, reading and researching to see how they spoke, the kinds of language they used, the kind of things they would say, the syntax of their speech, and just each of us keeping each other honest in terms of, if I would read something somebody else had written or vice versa, and it felt like that's not really, Magnus wouldn't say that, or Erebus wouldn't say that, or whatever it was. We would, there was a lot of feedback between us all, just making sure that things were, as far as possible, kept to an even keel as to who they sounded like, and did they sound like themselves as they went through the book. So lots of communication, lots of reading, and I could show you email chains that could be novels in their own right, just the length of them.
So one thing we noticed too when we were going through all the various books that were released and the authors that were associated to them, it seems that there are a couple legions in particular that authors focus on, like for instance, you with 1,000 Suns. Is that something you're just one of the office where like I call them, I'm gonna do all the books about the 1,000 Suns?
I think it speaks to, I think, each author's particular proclivities in terms of what the kinds of stories they like to tell. I mean, we naturally gravitate towards moments of high drama and moments that speak to us on some level. I think, that there's ways and means. I think I have identified with some of each of the Primarchs that I've written extensively about. And not to suggest that I'm on their level kind of thing, but the travails they go through, the doubts that they feel, or the ways they like to approach things. There's echoes, distant maybe, but echoes nonetheless of each of us. But certainly with Magnus had always been one of my favorites, even from like way back in the day. I just loved his story. I loved the tragedy of his story. So that was one that had always appealed to me. And I think I've said this to people before in conversations and conventions and what have you, is that I originally wasn't slated to write 1,000 Suns. Originally, I was going to do the book that became Prospero Burns, and Dan was going to do 1,000 Suns. And we'd had a whole bunch of meetings at Black Library where we were talking about the raising of Prospero, because we were working to get our facts in order, like collate everything that had been written and said about this battle and codexes and army books and supplements and so on. And we were deep diving into like who were the 1,000 Suns, who were the Space Wolves, and what made them tick, and why they did what they did, and how this all came about. And just over the course of a few days, as we were just deep in the weeds of these legions, we realized that actually Dan was gravitating much more towards the Space Wolves, and I was leaning much more into the 1,000 Suns. And so we just sort of looked at each other one day and we're like, do you want to swap? And that was it. He was doing Prospero Burns then, and I was doing 1,000 Suns. So I wasn't originally slotted to do that, but I think the way we think about things, the way we approach storytelling and characters was just coming out more and more as the discussions went on, to the point where we just realized this we're in the wrong place here. I should be in that seat and you should be in this one. And I think that was just it came out of just who we are as writers and storytellers. But with like Fulcrum, for example, that was one on like the very first day that we all gathered at Black Library to talk about the Horus Heresy as a project and what it meant, how we would approach it, the kind of things we would do with it. Alan Merritt, who was the sort of head of IP at Games Workshop at the time, and he was laying out, here are the fundamentals of the heresy. And a lot of it was stuff that, yeah, we already know this, but it was like, digging deep into the original mythology of what the creators were thinking when they first introduced it into the lore way back when. And some of that was really like fundamentally like, oh, that's new. I did not know that's what your thinking was for this. But when Alan was going on about the Fulcrum and Ferris arc and how it was shaped and what the original design decisions were about those characters and so on when they were first concepted, I remember just filling. I had my notepad in front of me and I just filled the whole page with just, I must write this, and then showed it to Jim Swallow, who was sat next to me, and he just gave me one of these patented Jim kind of slow nods. So yeah, that one, as Alan was describing that conflict, I was like, yeah, that's so up my alley. I've got to write that. So then, 5 books later, I did. But yeah, the Magnus one was just, I think I was fated to write that one. I just didn't know it at the time.
How different do you think like 1,000 Suns and Prospero Burns would have been if it was if it was done like it was supposed to be originally?
That's the sort of the ultimate for me what if question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell because, I don't get me wrong. I love writing my feral savage barbarians, like with the best of them. I've used Space Wolves of stories many a time, and I've loved writing them. I think mine would probably have been a more feral tribal nature than the sheer cleverness that Dan had worked into them. Because Prospero Burns, is, as much as it is a heresy story, it's also kind of like an espionage thriller as well. You know, there's elements of double crossing, double agents, and plans within plans, which, you know, is not necessarily what you expect from the Space Wolves. But the way Dan wrote it was like, yeah, of course, that's exactly the right way. That feels perfectly for what they would be. So I think mine would have been probably more sort of earthy barbarian types, which would have been to their detriment, I think, in the whole arc of the story. And I, you know, Dan's Thousand Sons would have been gloriously mad and convoluted and so on. So I think possibly they might have been further apart than they actually are now if we'd done it that way. Whereas now I think they're much, much closer together, which is an interesting way of. I think it turned out interesting because the Thousand Sons, I think, were not what people expected, and neither were the Space Wolves. So that was always part of our mantra when doing the Heresy. Is like, this is a story where people, generally speaking, know how it ends. They, generally speaking, know the big beats of the story. So it was always try and bring something new to the table. Always try and have layers beneath the story that everybody knows to bring an element of like, oh wow, I did not know that aspect of it, and how different I now perceive this event and others subsequent to it by this extra knowledge I have. So like I say, who knows which one would have been the better one, but the one we have is one I think is fun and interesting, and, you know, kind of reads almost as propaganda from each other's side. So the debate of who was right, did Magnus do anything wrong, still goes on 10 years after those books came out. So exactly, even in the one room, you've got, yes, he did, no, he didn't. So to me, that's a sign of something worked in that partnership, in that collaboration, in that iteration of what they became, because it's theory crafting. You know, you've got players and readers arguing to this day who did right, who did wrong, and that's great.
So that's actually really interesting because one of the first couple months that I started playing the tabletop, I had read the first few books. I was on Fulcrum. Really glad you wrote Fulcrum, by the way, because that has been our favorite novel so far.
Yep.
But I was talking to a couple of the guys I was playing with, and they were arguing about whether or not Magnus did anything. So it's really cool to see, like, after reading that book, I'm like, oh, he kind of did, but kind of not. It's kind of like a rough situation.
Well, that's always the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, like his intentions were, he wanted to, you know, to lift humanity's gaze from the mud. He wanted to show them the amazing things that he knew and take them on a journey to the next level of their consciousness. But, you know, he did it in a way and methods that he was told explicitly not to use. You know, don't go this way. You're not ready for it. They are not ready for it. And, you know, Magnus's flaw was always the thinking that he knew better than everybody else. That I'm the smartest guy in the room, and if I don't know it, I will soon, and none of you guys can tell me anything different. So even though there was terrible peril ahead in what he was doing, he kind of disregarded it, thinking, I will clever my way through anything that I encounter.
So kind of on that story arc, one of the things that we always talk about, and we're always trying to figure out and solve this unsolvable mystery. One of the biggest issues with Magnus's story was the role of the Emperor. We could never figure out why he chose to do some of the things that he did, why he chose not to tell Magnus, why he chose not to do this. And we find the Emperor a really interesting character because he appears differently to different people.
Yep.
I guess as a writer, I know he's supposed to be a mysterious figure in the end. How much of the Emperor's plan do you guys know?
Well, man, that has been hours of debate around the table in Nottingham about that. About, you know, because that's one of the first sort of fundamentals. We thought, well, we should probably know this if we're going to embark on this series of novels. What was the plan? What ultimately did he want to do? And yeah, well, we arrived at a consensus of this was the aim. This was the North Star he was aiming for. So many, you know, like, you can't, as much as the Emperor thinks he knows the future, he doesn't know it all. You know, there are billion variables at every step of the way, and though some of them will be knocked to the side the more the steps you take, there's always going to be wrinkles in time, changes to the plan, and the light of that North Star will fade or dissipate or shift. So his plan, it was a movable target. Sometimes it was the plan was this, sometimes it was that, but it was always roughly in the same space. As to why I didn't tell, it's like, for the same reason you don't tell somebody something bad because you think it will hurt them, or you think if they know about it they'll just want it more, and you naively or you stupidly think, well, if I don't tell them they will never find out about it. And that suggests a level of stupidity on the Emperor's part, but it's not that. It's more a case of, if I don't tell them about it for long enough, maybe we can reach that point in the future where it won't matter, and then when they're ready, I can tell them. But unfortunately, events escalated and got to the point where it was too late. That actually, yeah, I should have told them beforehand. But if we can get to this point here, then we'll be ready, and then I can tell them. So again, it was probably, he's like a project manager with very fixed milestones, but then reality gets in the way and messes up his carefully, laid out plan. It's like, the more, like anything else, the more fixed your plan is, the more easily it can be disrupted. And I think that was the point. That some of that is what passed into Magnus, that cleverness. This is my plan and this is how it will work out. So when, little drops of oil get sprinkled into the mix, it deviates it just even a fraction. But then, and again, as Magnus points out, like the tiniest microscopic fractional deviation at the beginning of a thing will magnify and grow over time till it's colossal. And I think that's part of what went wrong.
So we often describe the Emperor as playing chess with the Chaos Gods, and he set the pieces. And much like Magnus in the beginning, he probably believed that he didn't have to worry about the deals he was making. He would just win in the end.
Yeah.
Consequences. Do you think he lost the game?
Well, again, this is something that's, chess as a metaphor pops up quite a few times through the course of the novels. The thing is, by the time things get close to the end of the heresy, I think the Emperor has seen that the losing is the most likely outcome here. Even though we may beat them, we lose. But it's like was one of the things Gav always should say, that the opposite of chaos isn't order, it's stasis. And the Emperor, I think, with stasis is buying time. That's one of the ways we looked at it. It's like, okay, I'm not going to win, but I can't, it's like sometimes the way you win or the way not to lose is to stop the other guy from winning. Okay, maybe everything's in flames and it's collapsed and half of us are dead, but he didn't win. And we've got this stasis moment that's lasted for 10,000 years, which have been hard years full of war, but at least chaos hasn't taken over the galaxy. And that has bought time for the Soldier of the Ecclesiarchy to rise, the Primaris Marines to come back, for Gulliman to be reborn, and so on. There are pieces coming back to the board, to use that metaphor again, that wouldn't have been, when the final battle, when the Ragnarok finally comes, it'll probably be tipped in the Emperor's side's favor if they have a few of their Primarchs back, if they have an entire galaxy geared for war, that they, by the time the heresy ended, that just didn't exist anymore. I mean, the galaxy was literally burning on all sides. So that's one way to look at it. So, because the Emperor plays the long game.
Yeah, we've heard it from Graham, straight from the word of mouth. 40K is the stasis, and eventually it's going to get crazy again. Hopefully, we've already had the returning Primarch, and the only thing we know for sure is it's not going to be good for the Tau.
No, nothing ever is.
He's a Tau player over here. He's a little upset.
I've got a Tau army back there as well.
Yeah, we see you got a bunch of stuff back there. Do you play both 40K and Age of Sigmar?
I have the Soul Wars box set up there, which I've painted a few of the models from. I have not got around to playing it yet. I mean, I'm looking at the new models from third edition. I'm sorely tempted, but like I say, I have an Indomitus box that still needs painting. I'm hopefully when the new kill team comes out, I'm going to be trying to snap up a box of that. So yeah, I mean, I would love to. I mean, I would buy some of the Age of Sigmar models just because they're such gorgeous models, but I have not yet got around to playing a game of it. But yeah, 40k kill team. Yeah, we play that pretty regularly.
What's your go-to army?
In a move that will surprise nobody, Ultramarines. I have my Ultramarines 4th Company just on that shelf there. But I mean, I have Necrons below that, and I started out with in playing a lot of kill team just to vary up the teams we could play. I'll just do a little Tyranid one, get a couple of Gene Stealers, a few Warriors, and so on, and that has swollen to become an army. So I've got a couple of Morlocks to paint now, and yes, so mostly Ultramarines are my go-to, but I've got Death Guard, Tyranids, Tau, and Necrons.
Dylan just started his Grey Knight army a couple months ago.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. So do you go to like a local game store to play, or how do you do that?
Oh, not at the moment, no. Yeah, there's a few places in LA. There's a place called Next Gen Games. Been there to play before. But yeah, we've got a good setup in the house here that we can use to play.
I was gonna ask if you get swarmed whenever you go to a store like that to play, because I mean you've written so much of the lore.
I'm Graham with his army there. That's all.
That's awesome.
So we have a couple questions from our listeners that they wanted to ask you.
Absolutely, go ahead.
A lot of it's about the novel writing process, and both of them are things that we wanted to ask as well. But from our viewer Thomac, he wanted to know how much of it has been at the writer's discretion, mainly because, and this was something I was curious about, 40k set, we know what happens to the Emperor, we know what happens to Sanguinius, we know what happens to the Primarchs. Does that ever feel restrictive to you, to where you can't kill certain characters and do certain things?
Not at all, no. I mean, I think most creatives that I've spoken to, constraints are often a good thing. I mean, I think the conception that everybody wants is vast and empty blue sky, empty page, go anywhere, do anything is the best thing, and I'm not sure it is. I think having a few stakes in the ground, a few guide rails and boundaries put in place is great. I mean, because to me that spurs creativity, that spurs this ability to be able to say, okay, here's what I've got to play with. How can I play with this in the most exciting, dramatic, emotional way? So, no, it doesn't. I don't feel constrained at all. I mean, the galaxy is a big place. There are stories to be told all throughout it, and not just in terms of its volume and its space. It's just the kinds of stories you can tell, the kinds of characters you can have. Warhammer crime, horror. 40k, there's all sorts of styles of stories, styles of characters. So, like I said, like we were saying a little bit earlier on, generally speaking, the authors have more or less free reign to do what they want in the stories, and the guidelines are there. We know what Space Marines are. We know that orcs are green. That there are rules to the world that you play with, and it's a shared universe. So you have to play nice with the toys in the box. You can't just smash them up and say, I do what I want, because you work with an editor who's part of Games Workshop, and you want, as an editor and as a writer, to continue writing in that world, to preserve that IP. You want to put your own flavor on it, your own stamp on moments and events in it. But it's a shared universe. Other people have to play with the toys as well, and you have to play with them after other people have used them. So there's a shared responsibility to play nice in the setting. But yeah, I mean, as far as story goes, you're absolutely encouraged to make it your own and tell your own story and do what you want with it. I mean, your outline will always be agreed upon between working with an editor. So if you've got something in there that's like, well, the emperor steps off his throne and kills Guilliman and then becomes the next chaos god, they're probably going to say, yeah, no, that's not happening. So yeah, it's generally speaking, you don't go into any project without an outline agreed. Well, you don't go into a novel writing without an outline agreed, because that's part of the the contract process. But yeah, I mean, be as inventive as you want. Tell the story you want to tell, and work with your editor to make it that story.
When you were writing Fulcrum and you wrote the concert scene, did your editor just look at you like, what the fuck?
Well, it was Lindsay. Lindsay Priestley was my editor in that book. Yeah, there were a few kind of emails that went back, sort of going, really? But that scene, no, not really. I mean, I think I changed one line in that one, that was like, as in cut out, because we can't say that. But that scene largely passed without too much in the way of cuts, just because it was so over the top. It was so, Suspiria, over the top, Grand Guignol excess, that it had to be, if you're going to do Slaanesh properly, it had to be almost to the point of ridiculously over the top. So no, that scene didn't particularly. But the only scene that did have to have some fairly deep cuts to, what was in it and how it was presented, was one of the scenes where Serena sort of lures one of the remembrancers back to her chambers to, shall we say, harvest him for materials for her paintings. Some of that scene had to get, have its wings clipped a little bit, and for good reason. But then, like I said to Lindsay at the time, and even before I started writing it, as like this is a book about Slaanesh and excess in all its forms. It's gonna get funky through the run of this. So expect that. So you don't read this and come in horrified. Just expect that it's gonna get gory and grotesque and beautiful at times. But here's the thing: I fully believe in situations like that. You push as far as you can and too far, because it's far easier to cut back on things than maybe not go far enough and leave something that's potentially a little bit insipid or not as grotesque and beautiful and monstrous as it could have been.
That I will say, there's through many of our episodes we talked about how something happened, we had kind of set the book down, just kind of process it. But that was one scene that it was almost overstimulating. It was I was on an acid trip and I had to set that down. It's what the fuck just happened to my brain?
There you go then. Then that's exactly the effect is intended. I just want to fill that scene with so many wild images and over the top moments and crazy things happening, where it was there's almost too much to look at. There's almost so much happening, I can't take it all in at once. Yeah, which to me feels like the essence of Slaanesh.
When we were reviewing the books and trying to decide which one was our favorites, at one point we were between Fulgrim and Thousand Suns. The reason we picked Fulgrim was because Fulgrim, it felt like an actual tragedy. Fulgrim didn't know what was happening to him, where Magnus, it was he did it to himself the entire time. Mm-hmm. And it was just that, and just the overstimulation constantly. It was oh my
god.
Yeah, I mean,
didn't want to put down. Fulcrum was one of those books where there would be periods of times you had
to. Excellent. I mean, to be fair, both of them, I view both of them as tragedies, in this, in the sense of that they are, at their heart lies a noble character who is undone by a singular flaw that they cannot see in themselves. That Magnus, with his hubris and his overweening pride in thinking he's the smartest guy in the room and unable to believe that anybody else might know more than him. Fulgrim, with his attachment to perfection over all else. That idea that this is the, and that's the thing that Ferris points out to him at the end, and the demon does to him at the end when it tears the veil off his sight and shows him all the decisions you made were wrong, and here's why. You thought these, because Fulgrim was at his heart was a narcissist, and that narcissistic character does not take kindly to having its plans poked at or its flaws looked at, or anyone saying that's not right or that's wrong, because they tend to lash out against that. And that was very much Fulgrim's way of deflecting criticisms, which were actually, as it turns out, entirely legitimate, but he couldn't take them. He could not hear that he had somehow not achieved perfection, that he'd somehow not done the best thing that ever could have been done. And only at the end, when the demons sort of pulled that away from him and showed him how all these people who'd been trying to help him all this time, he saw it as a hurt, he saw it as an attack, and lashed back at them rather than listening, like a hopefully normal person, but then, would do. But then none of us like criticism. None of us like hearing you did that badly, or you're not great at this. We tend to lash out, but his, being a Primarch, that lashing out is 10 times worse.
When writing the flaws for the Primarchs, did you guys just have sit down okay, they these godlike beings, they have to have something wrong with them? Did you guys kind of plan that out, or was it I'm writing this is how it's gonna go?
Yeah, again, we'd when somebody was due up for a novel, we would generally all gather and we would talk about thoughts for the idea for the novel. And we're not not in a sense of you have to tell the story like this, but we just brainstorm ideas for moments to highlight a particular scene, or ways we could develop a particular character, or draw out this archetype of a novel or story. So yeah, there was lots of thoughts shared between us all about who is Fulcrum, who is Magnus, who is Angron, what do they do, what aspect of the Emperor do they represent the most, where a lot of them it was generally not too difficult, because we looked at, okay, what are their strengths, what is the thing that makes them who they are, and you look at that and human beings, if you take a strength and you push it too far, it becomes a weakness. Like courage, yes, that's a strength, but you push that too far and it becomes recklessness. I'll charge any enemy, even if they've got 10 machine guns pointing at me. Confidence can become pride. Cleverness can become arrogance. All these strengths taken too far can be something bad. So using that kind of analogy, that's a simplistic sort of reductive way of looking at it, but that was an easy way to get in to the question. We found, okay, that sort of cracked the door open to us. Okay, that's what leads us to their weakness. Let's develop that. Let's see how that would manifest. What does that mean for their interactions with other Primarchs, with the Emperor, with their soldiers, with the mortals, with aliens? And we would, we'd just brainstorm and game out a number of situations or moments that we knew would come in the story, and say, well, how would somebody like Fulton react to that? How would somebody like Magnus deal with this kind of rejection? Would they be angry? Would they turn it inwards, and so on? So again, just lots of talking and communication back and forth after the events.
Gotcha. So another question for our Discord from one of our listeners named Daniel. He's been with us since day one, basically.
Hello, Daniel.
He's really into cult references and things, and has pointed out several of the things that you guys have had in the books that has gone into like real world things, like the Council of Nicaea was something that happened in Rome. Do you guys plan these things? It's hey, we need this incorporated. How do these references get made?
9 times out of 10, it'll be the author will come up with it, or see a parallel to some moment or organization in history and so on. Generally they don't come up when you're outlining that level of detail is not useful. It's only, you're planning a novel up at 30,000 feet, where the broad strokes of things go, okay, at this point in the book, the characters have to be at mental state X, Y, or Z, and so on. It's only really when you get down in the weeds, you start to see, all right, okay, this is what this character is saying, this is what they are doing, and so on. And all of us do a lot of research for our books anyway. For Magnus, I did a ton of research on things like the Order of the Golden Dawn, and the Aleister Crowley and Rosicrucianism and so on. And I've got a book called the Book of English Magic, which was a great touchstone for moments of folklore, moments of mythology, the origins of magic through certainly the United Kingdom and how that developed. And a ton of things came out of the reading of that. And I'd always been kind of a fan of occulty stuff anyway, so I knew enough to know what rabbit holes to go down to find extra information, things like, the Voynich manuscript and the terminology of like the level of order, the ranks within orders, for zealoters and so on, all the different types, how the Golden Dawn was organized, the types of magic they used, the types of mythology behind what they spoke about. So, I mean, that's always been a thing I've been interested in anyway. So writing about Magnus was a perfect opportunity to go deep. As far as references to, ancient characters, moments, books from history and so on, it's all just, the author's own kind of interests often manifesting through those little references.
It's just something you guys want to slide in there, see if anybody notices.
Yeah, exactly. There's all sorts of things, like there's let's say there's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy joke / reference in Fulcrum, which slides past most people, but it's been pointed out a few times enough that I go, cool, people got that one.
Nice. So, I guess one question that I know all of our listeners want to know. Can Astartes fuck? And if so, do they?
Well, that's between the Astartes and their god. I've my personal, absolutely non-official, non-canon way of thinking about it is that they are biologically fully equipped, but the training, the bioconditioning, everything about their very existence eliminates any urge to do that. There's no need to. They're functionally immortal. They're not driven by a sense of mortality that we are to have our species and our lineage and our name continue. That's nothing to do with their psyche. Their deeds, their self is kind of subsumed into the Legion, into the Emperor, to the Imperium itself. They're there to further that, and that's how they will achieve immortality. They don't have any urge to drive their physicality to exist beyond their own existence. So I would say no.
Do you have any Primarch character that you wrote that you just loved writing about?
The thing is, most of them die. most of the squishy people who get caught up between Astartes don't tend to last very long. I mean, some of the one, again, I'm going to try not to do this spoilery because I don't know how far maybe you or some of your listeners have gotten this, but two of my favorites to write about were Olivia Soreka, who is she's one of the perpetuals who pops up in Vengeful Spirit. I think it's the first time she arrives. And there's the hunter character, Yasu Nagasena, who first appears in The Outcast Dead. Both of them were, yeah. And Severian, his quarry at that point. Those three, but the first two especially, Olivia was tremendous fun to write. I had a lot of fun with her.
I would say Lemuel's one of my favorites from Thousand Suns, just because he had this chubby guy who throughout the story is getting skinnier and he's just so human. It was awesome to read.
So it's he's one of the few that does carry on between a few books. I mean, all the remembrances were. I mean, the space. I mean, to fly in the face of one of the answers earlier. Some of the Space Marine characters, they're not as changeable as the human ones. They do go through emotional arcs and changes, but it's a slower pace. Whereas the humans, with their more fickle minds and more mercurial natures, tend to change a lot quicker. So, seeing people like what's their name, Serena and Ostian in Fulcrum go through. Serena go from this unsure, lack of confidence painter to this crazy mad woman, painting this monstrous portrait of Fulcrum, and Ostian going from that, the celebrity venerated sculptor to this, desperate man at the end. Those arcs are fun to do. So the remembrances offer you, I think, a more, yes, certainly more human arc, but a an arc you can more easily identify with as a fellow human reader. You can read that and go, hopefully in some cases, holy shit, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Like they're the ones that allow us to read them and go, what would I have done? What would I have done in that similar situation? Would I have, embraced the decadence of Slanesh and become a demonette myself, or would I have resisted and been killed? Who knows? And that's, those are interesting questions to answer, and you can more easily answer them with the remembrancers. So they're a ton of fun to write. So the little gang of them in Thousand Suns were a lovely little group to write about. And let's say the ones from False Gods and Horus Rising, the ones they were great. So yeah, they're just fun.
Yeah, that's exactly how we describe them all the time. It's just like fun characters. Is there any book that like you wish you would have written?
Wow. Well, all the ones I did. There's, not in terms of like quality. It's, you could pick any one of them almost, because they're all stories that, oh man, that's cool. That's a cool aspect of things. In terms of just cool, convoluted, yeah, that really got to the heart of the chapter. I think Legion is a great book for that.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of, and this is from a different angle of approach, but for a long time in the discussions and the meetings, it was always kind of assumed by me and others in the room and the readers that I would eventually do the Battle of Calth, the Ultramarines book, because for some reason I'm associated with Ultramarines. So it was always kind of assumed that I would do that one. But then when the time came, we were looking at, okay, here's the schedule, here's the beats of the heresy as we understand it. Okay, so the next, okay, well, we're going to need to do the Battle of Calth, okay, and to get it in before, because the Battle of Calth needed to happen before this other novel, which I forget the order that we were doing them at the time, but it needed to be done here because that novel's coming out here, so Calth has to appear here. So if we're going to get that book written, then we need to start it in about a week or 2 weeks from now. And at that point, I think I was hip deep in The Outcast Dead at the time, and I was like, well, there's just no way. I'm going to be on this book for at least another 2 months before I finish it. And by that point, the deadline for when we'd need to start the Battle for Calth is long gone, and I'm never going to be able to fit it in time. And Dan, fortunately for us all, was like, well, I've kind of got a window at this point. I could do it. I could start it. So, for those, given those circumstances, I would have loved to have told the story of the Battle of Calth that Dan wrote in No Fear. But like I say, if there's ever somebody who's going to pick up the baton when you can't, there's not many people better than Dan Abnett to do it. So I would have loved to have written that story, but time and circumstances meant I couldn't.
Is there any that you feel like you wish you could rewrite after all of this stuff?
No, never. No, because I would never hand a book to my editors if I wasn't happy with it. If I thought, it's not good enough, it's not quite there. It always changes even after that, because there's always editorial notes, there's continuity things, bits you may have missed. There's always changes from a manuscript before, there's, many a slip twixt cup and lip between the moment you hand it over to the moment they hit the word print and it goes to the printers. So, but, and it's, those changes are pretty much always for the best. But I would never email a completed manuscript to one of my editors if I wasn't thinking, yeah, okay, this is good. I'm happy with this. I'm happy for you to read this now. So no, I stand by all the stories I told, the characters I created, and so on. So no, I always look at a book as a sort of time capsule. It's an encapsulation of who I was as a writer, as a person, as a creator. So no, I wouldn't, because I've had opportunities to do that where, like for example, with Nightbringer, the first novel I ever wrote, the event at one point they were coming out with a I think it was the Masterworks edition or something like that. A new collection of it. It was like, and Black Library said, they gave me the opportunity to look, with this. You wrote that book like, nearly 15 years ago. You've grown and developed as a writer. Do you want to go back and do a new and extended version? And a new, not extended, but a new updated version. Maybe tidy up some of the saggy bits in it, or rewrite some bits to draw in some of the continuity you've done for the future novels. And my initial thing was, oh, that could be cool. Yeah, it could be cool. But then again, when I put some thought into it, I was like, no, that book is what it is. And sure, it's filled with the mistakes a first-time novelist would make, and there's bits that go on too long, bits that don't get enough time, and some parts are rushed and some parts take too long. But yes, I could maybe enhance the craft of it in certain places, but I think the heart of it, I don't think I could improve on that, in the sense of it would be a different book then. It wouldn't be Nightbringer. It would be something else. And I was like, no, I want that book to stay as it is. So no, I wouldn't go back and change anything.
Whenever you see reading orders for the Heresy, you see these giant flow charts. How was it writing through these different ways, right? Because from my understanding, it wasn't supposed to be this many books, and then it got expanded. What was it like trying to decide what books were coming next, how
What events?
Yeah, or events. How was these lined up?
Well, we had a timeline from very early on that was built out from existing materials, and the editors did a great job of parsing out all the big moments from previous, Arm Books, Codexes, supplements, from Epic, from 40k, because all the different styles of game over the years had all mentioned the Heresy or had little bits of color text in it and so on. So the editors did a great job for us of collating that together. As far as timeline in terms of the actual books goes, a lot of that was driven by, okay, well, we know this timeline, we know this event happens here, so it's who's available, who's got interest. Well, we can't tell, say, the Battle for Foul until we've told the raising of Calth. We can't tell this story until that moment has happened. So a lot was driven by that initial timeline that we put together. And the way the first, first 5 books, because I think the first 5 books are there's a very definite sort of line in the sand after the first, because the opening trilogy sets it all in motion. Flight of the Eisenstein that Jim wrote takes it to the wider galaxy, and Fulcrum took it to Istvan and the massacre there. So from that point onwards, it's okay, we've told the building blocks now that need to be in place for everything else to come. Go nuts. So after that, we knew roughly when certain events happened, so it made sense to tell this novel here. It made sense to tell that novel there. So order-wise, it wasn't that difficult. There was only a couple of times where we suddenly realized, oh crap, we haven't done this storyline, and that storyline is the one that sets up this big one here that we've got already in the schedule. Crap, okay, we need to scramble to get one of us to write something for that. So it was pretty much the timeline of the Heresy dictated the timeline of the order of the book releases. It got, I wouldn't say messy, but it got more complex the more we kind of deviated from the main highway, because there was a central spinal highway that told from the opening of Horus Rising to what will be the end of the Heresy in the final book of the Siege. There's a straight line that runs between that, but there are a million off ramps, a million on ramps that go to their own little stories, and some of them are prequels. So things like the Last Church or the Divine Adoratrice. They're told earlier in the story than the main sequential novels would tell you. So yeah, I would be daunted if somebody said, okay, go and put together the definitive list of how you should read the Horus Heresy. That would be tricky, because some books span multiple timelines. Some books go from way in the distant past and stay into the future. So it's like, well, do you read like 5 chapters of this, then go back and read another book, then come back and read the next 3 chapters and so on? I think there's a level of just bloody mindedness. You just go through it, books 1, 2, 3, 4, go through it in order, but take tangents. You know, they're all there to be taken.
When doing like the short stories, like The Last Church, was that something that you kind of like approached like them about, like, hey, like I really would like to write about like the Emperor or something like that, or was it like, hey, like we need like these kind of stories written out, who wants to do this?
Yeah, because we always thought it was like there was a book in mind and it didn't quite have enough juice to make it off the ground, so we kind of put it into a short story. That kind of
No, and that's generally speaking. I mean, you know when an idea has got the legs enough to be a novel, or whether it is a short story, or whether an idea. I mean, you can use short stories that are a great way to experiment. You know, with a tone, a setting, a style of writing. You know, they're a great way to dip a toe in a particular water. You know, like I did with the Caban project, the Mechanica story that is in the Visions of Treachery books. I'd never written fully about the Mechanicus, but dipping a toe in the water with that story made me go, holy shit, I really want to tell more about these guys. This world, this setting, this feeling is exciting to me. I want to do more of that. With The Last Church in particular, the short story books are always commissioned as, okay, we're doing a bunch of short stories. They're never like, okay, this one didn't quite make it to novel length. Okay, let's stick it in a book. They're always designed to be short stories or novellas or what have you. And certainly with that story in particular, it was a case, because I was late coming to that one. You know, that I knew they wanted me to do a short story for it, but I didn't get round to actually planning one out until quite late. They'd already got all the other stories, and mine was the last one in, because I was finishing off another novel. So by the time, you know, I had decks clear enough to take this story, I said to Lindsay, look, can you share what you've got so far? Just, I mean, not necessarily the stories themselves, but share out like a little couple of lines on what each story is, just so I don't end up duplicating effort. I don't go, I want to do a Space Wolf story and you've got 3 Space Wolf stories in it or something. So she sent me like a paragraph on each story, and I looked at them and I was like, okay, they're all quite similar. They're not in terms of, they're all very action, fighting driven battle stories. And I thought, well, like I said earlier on, I like that. A good anthology, a good story has texture, has variance in the tone and style. So I was like, okay, well, every one of these other stories is a story driven by kind of fighting and combat. What if we had a story in there that had none of that? You know, and it was almost like a challenge I set myself. Like, can I tell an interesting story that has none of the usual crutches that we often rely on in these stories? Can I tell a story that has basically, it's just a two-hander? It's like a play almost. It's 2 characters in it. There's no fighting. There's very little of, you know, traditional action in terms of, you know, chain swords and explosions. There's none of that in it. It's like, can I tell a story that is interesting to write, that the readers will respond to and engage with, and the Black Library would be willing to publish, given it is not in the vein of traditional stories that they did? And luckily the answer, I think, to those 3 was yes. I mean, you know, Nick loved the story. I had a great time writing it, and a lot of the readers responded to it. You know, mostly, yeah, we love the story. Others like, no, it's crap, it's shit. Where's the explosions? Or this character's a straw man, yada yada, and so on. So, but it was one deliberately written to add some texture of difference to that anthology.
How much like leeway do you get when like writing about the Emperor? Because, you know, he's supposed to be this like mysterious being or whatever. Like, what are you allowed to actually like write about? Like, what type of like constraints do they give you?
Yeah, because if you think about it, really up to the point that we're at, because we're through Prospero Burns, The Last Church is the most we get of the Emperor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, deliberately so. I mean, the Emperor ought to be a kind of distant character at this point. You know, he's teased here and there. He appears here in a guise of some sort. But, you know, if I'm reading stories about the Second World War, you know, you're not going to see like Churchill and Hitler turn up too much. It's the guys in the ground fighting the war. They're distant figures giving the orders, directing things, or what have you. But as the story moves on, yes, you start to see more of him, and yes, you start to see more of his motivations and his weaknesses and his plans and so on, because going where we're going with this and the ending that we're driving towards, you have to have some appreciation for who the Emperor is and what his plans are and what his grand design was to be, because, again, not to get too spoilery, but, you know, the Emperor, it doesn't end particularly nicely for the Emperor. And that moment will have no emotional heft to it if we haven't built the character up. But obviously, you know, in the early, you know, the first stuff, if you're at Prospero Burns, you're at book something like book 8 or 9 or something now. It's too early to start building that up, you know, because then you'll expect more and more and more to the point where we'll just, here you're getting, you know, at home with the Emperor kind of moments in it, and we don't want that. Not until later on, when you start to see not the man behind it, but the soul behind what was happening, and then understanding that will give weight to that moment at the end when it happened. Horus and the Emperor finally face off. We will have a better, pardon me, we will have a better understanding of the Emperor to feel the loss of his dream, of his plan, when everything comes crashing down at the end.
So I mean, we're to see the end of Siege of Terra. Like, what is it like having been part of this giant series at this point?
Wow, I mean, it literally was life changing for me, certainly, and I know for a lot of us, because I don't think any of us at any point of involvement in this just knew how big it was going to get. And we, you know, I think we all thought, yeah, this is going to be pretty, people will like this, it'll be popular. We hope it will be, we think it will be. But it was orders of magnitude more popular than we ever could have hoped for. Because like we'd originally figured, okay, we'll do maybe an opening trilogy, a closing trilogy, and who knows, maybe 8 or 9 books in the middle. Blah, that'll be fine. But then very quickly it was clear that that's not what's going to happen here. We're going to do this a lot more. The level of popularity and enthusiasm for these books from the writers, from the readers, was off the charts. So we all kind of made a sort of pact at the beginning. It's like, okay, so long as people are interested in reading these, and so long as we are all engaged in writing them, let's do this. Let's take this as far as it can go. So yeah, it's been, you know, we've told some of the biggest stories from 40K's history. You know, we've played with the biggest characters. The growth of us as writers, as people, as collaborators has been tremendous fun to be part of. And, you know, I think the Horus Heresy now is like I think it's the biggest long-running sci-fi story ever done. I forget the exact wording of that, whatever, but it's broken some record or something like that. But to have been part of that it's been a huge honor. You know, it's been a privilege to be telling the stories that mean so much to so many people. Because I mean, I remember, you know, 15, 16-year-old being in the back room of my mum and dad's house, playing 40K and reading the stories of the Primarchs and going, wow, these are so cool. And then, you know, fast forward a bunch of years and it's like, oh, actually, shit, I'm telling that story now. Is, you know, 15-year-old me his head would have exploded to think of that at that moment. So it's been brilliant. You know, I've met some amazing people through writing this. I've worked with some amazing people. The collaborations I've had have been hugely impactful in terms of friendships, of lessons learned, career growth, of skills learned. It's been amazing, absolutely amazing.
Do you think like it's like the heresy like era is like big enough, or like, you know, after the Siege of Terra ends, like you could still do like small like spin-off series of like random things throughout it, or do you think once Siege of Terra ends, like that's it?
I certainly think it's got enough depth to the warp and weft of it that I think absolutely it can sustain stories, because obviously we could not hope to tell every moment that happened during that conflict. There are moments that we had to skip over, moments that maybe, didn't get as much time in the sun as we'd have liked. Like for example, the Battle of Istvan. That was told towards the end of Fulcrum. That battle appeared there, and I knew going into the start of that this is not going to be the definitive story of that battle. I'm telling this one tiny sliver of it that is pertinent to Fulcrum and Ferrus Manus and the people immediately in their environs, and we will see and hear the backdrop around them of this story, but that I'm not trying to tell that story. So we left plenty of room for other novels to explore moments of that. I mean, you could fill several novels with events of Istvan. So, and that's just one battle. So the actual Horus Heresy itself, yeah, absolutely. I think there are many, many corners yet to be illuminated and many, many stories yet to be told in there. I don't know quite what strategy would use to approach that, but yeah, absolutely. I think there's plenty of corners to explore in that.
It's definitely a bittersweet moment, right? Because you have this amazing series coming to an end, and you have the Siege of Terra kind of coming to an end as well. And what's great about it, though, is these characters, they still exist in the 40K universe, and you
many of them.
Utilizing them, and they're there for writing in the future in the 40K setting, and also for people to play with. I mean, this whole thing is literally just for people to have fun, and it's cool to.
Absolutely.
And I think we're expecting a lot from the Black Library, because we were talking about books that we plan on reading after we finish Horus Heresy and the Siege of Terra.
Mm-hmm.
About 50 books.
Yeah. There's plenty of room for more stories within there. I mean, I've no idea quite how we'll approach what comes next, because it's been such an integral part of the Black Library range for so long now. I'm not sure what we'll do to follow it up or how we'll expand upon it, but I'm sure it'll be exciting, and I'm hopefully going to be part of it.
I know you have a hard out 5 minutes. Is there any other questions you want to ask, Gavin? All right. Well, is there anything you'd like to shout out, Graham? I don't know if you have any upcoming work or anything like that.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk story and characters with folk who are, invested in the lore as well. Because I guarantee you we could chat for another 2 hours easily if we had the time to do it. So, well, my latest Ultramarines novel, Swords of Calth, is out now. If you like all things Ultramarine shaped, that'd be a cracking read for you. And depending on how far you are through the Heresy and the Siege of Terra, my 2 novellas, Sons of the Selenar and Fury of Magnus, are also out there in the world and ready for your reading pleasure.
Perfect. When we get through the Siege of Terra, would love to have you on again if you were up for it, just because I think it would be such a different dynamic at that point.
Oh, given what you'd know by then, I think yes, it'd be great. We'll all have long grey beards at that point.
It will probably be a while. But yes, I would love to appreciate you coming on here. This is awesome. I think that's it.
Let's do our emails.
Yeah, for those interested who would like to just give us any comments or questions for the future, for when Graham is back after the Siege of Terra in 3 years, you can email us at theheresylodge@gmail.com. You can tweet us at heresylodge. And again, thank you so much, Graham, for this. This is awesome, and can't wait to hear from you again.
Excellent. My pleasure, guys. Take care.
You too.